J'espère que vous avez participé à certaines des sessions des derniers jours, que vous avez encore de l'énergie pour nous, parce que cet après-midi, on veut vraiment entendre vos opinions, vos avis. C'est essentiel pour nous pour pouvoir nourrir nos réflexions en allant de l'avant. So welcome everybody. My name's Nick. It's wonderful to have you here with us. Just before I say any more, I just want to make sure you take a moment to get set up in the interpretation function. Choose the language of your choice between French and English, as there will be a fair bit of bilingual content in this session. Alors, avant d'aller plus loin, bien sûr, j'espère que vous vous accordez à l'interprétation. Choisissez la langue de votre choix. Vous devenez des pros à ça, je crois, maintenant, après quelques jours de forum. Et avant d'aller plus loin, et comme il se doit, je veux reconnaître que moi et plusieurs membres, presque tous les membres de l'équipe à Coopération Canada vous joignent de la ville nommée Ottawa sur les magnifiques territoires non cédés du peuple algonquin Anishinaabe. J'espère en effet que rendu maintenant, vous savez qui sont les peuples d'origine, où vous êtes, que vous avez réfléchi un peu cette semaine aussi, dans les dernières, de l'importance de travailler vers la réconciliation et de comprendre cette histoire qui définit qui nous sommes aujourd'hui. Notre session aujourd'hui est vraiment orientée pour vous solliciter afin de nous informer sur nos approches et l'évolution de nos pensées sur les priorités de plaidoyer, de prise de position et de politique chez nous à Coopération Canada. Notre objectif est vraiment d'arriver à articuler comment on veut prioriser notre travail. Now, I think you know that Cooperation Canada has a long history of policy and advocacy work. We saw with some of you that were in our member sort of input consultation yesterday after our AGM that you prioritize this as one of the important things that we do on behalf of the sector. And you know that we have long-standing commitments and values. Those are enshrined in many elements of our work. But we think that with all that is shifting around us today, with the big trends as they are evolving, it's important to be checking in with you, our members. And really the objective of this session is to frame our policy priorities and thinking in a forward-looking way, in a way that can be articulated to tie together all the kinds of priorities that you have as member organizations. This is a session where we're going to be hearing from you. You're going to be telling us where your work fits in our work. And it's really designed in that way. I hope you'll be engaging with the process. I hope you're ready to be part of this and using the interaction that's made available. I do also, of course, want to thank Children Believe for their contribution to support our simultaneous interpretation. We are grateful to their assistance, as we are grateful to all of our members for all of the contributions that you make to our work. Now that's enough from me, and I want to hand over to Gloria Novovic, who is our policy lead at Cooperation Canada. She's done a lot of thinking about what we're going to be discussing today, and I hope by now she's becoming a familiar personality to you, but I'm very happy to pass the microphone over to you, Gloria.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks everyone for coming. This is quite a big room given the topic of policy, so thank you for finding the time. I think what we are presenting in just a few minutes here will not surprise most of you. As we all know, we are an association of organizations working towards a safer, more equitable and sustainable world for us all. And so really what we have been thinking about in terms of our policy frames and the way we approach policy and speak about different policy priorities really has to fully reflect our agenda of social justice. And in that sense, it is a bit of a departure compared to the more traditional models of our sector more broadly that often hide power dynamics, inequality, and systemic barriers that actually perpetuate the global challenges we're all working to solve. And so perhaps during COVID, it became clearer than ever when we heard estimates that we as humanity lost about 25 years of human development progress in the first 25 weeks of the pandemic. It really does take one crisis to set back our struggle against poverty by a quarter of a century. And in that context, kind of re-examining whether we are fighting the right battles and if maybe we should not be talking and strategizing around fighting issues like poverty, but really systems that perpetuate it. And then a lot of reflections have taken place with many of you on the call in terms of what that really means for us and whom we're protecting when we hide some of these power dynamics, when we hide some of the causal mechanisms and responsibilities behind global injustices. What is the difference if we talk about countries that are poor versus countries that are historically exploited, and what that means for our recognition of the colonial legacy that continues to characterize our economic systems and broader geopolitical dynamics. So what is the difference between talking about vulnerable groups versus groups that are systemically oppressed and marginalized? And I don't think that we as Coopération Canada or as a sector are particularly unique in this approach, in this shift. Even the UN is increasingly adding more normative definitions to their language, talking about, for example, multilateralism that has no teeth in the case of the Secretary General, highlighting issues of lack of tax schemes to redistribute the massive amounts of wealth very few people have accumulated over the course of a global pandemic, despite looming global hunger and a lot of other issues we are facing and trying to address as a whole. And so really for us, that means very explicitly and deliberately shifting our policy frames in ways in which address and denounce white saviorism, moving away from ideas of Canada or any of us saving the world, and really insisting on the importance of global solidarity and nationally led approaches. In this sense, it is very often kind of an abstract idea of what that should entail, which reminds me that I was hoping to share my screen, but have clearly failed to do so. So in the documents, for some reason, I'm sharing the wrong screen. In the documents that we have shared with you prior to this call, we shared what is essentially a draft of our policy position. So hopefully you're able to see the sort of the core pillars that we have been working around and trying to really demystify some of these social justice terms and values and norms. There are a lot of ways in which we as an association are able to push this agenda forward, but we're really an association of all of you and an expression of your collective policy priorities. And so our work has largely been around trying to understand how we can best amplify your efforts, what your policy positions are, and clearly outlining key sort of umbrellas that can encompass then your policy priorities, never duplicating your work, never competing against any of our members, but driving our collective agenda forward, and then doing our best to really ensure that our mutual policy objectives are reinforcing and acting in a way that is consistent with values, even though our mandates might be very different. And so sadly, there's a very long list of challenges that we can lend our voices to, not stepping in and taking anybody's place, but amplifying other voices. So from colleagues who are addressing, for example, extractive industry and the harms that those actors are creating around the world, to feminist colleagues, many of whom are on the call, who have been sounding the alarms against Canada's arms trade with Saudi Arabia, for which Canada has, as a country, been called out by the UN for fueling conflict and human rights abuse. So a lot of these are essentially topics that we hope are quite familiar to you, and that we hope are within this type of an umbrella easier to sort of interconnect and group in pillars that are really impossible to separate. So what that means on our side is focusing on making sure that our own sector and our own collective space is more inclusive and equitable. This obviously includes work on anti-racism, many of the agendas we have before us and that we should all improve on, including reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, disability inclusion, and issues that we have been discussing even today with the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse session just behind us. Stepping sort of further from it, from a strengthened, more equitable sector, we hope to also inform broader mechanisms that really can either hinder or enable our work. And so this involves some of the work that hopefully you're familiar with around the direction and control, amending those legislative frameworks, working with Global Affairs Canada and all of you to improve systems of international cooperation, monitoring what is happening at the OECD DAC level and other forums to make sure that we are participating both as civil society that has specific interests and agendas, but also civil society based in a global north with responsibility to advocate for some of these more complicated issues with government actors to whom we often have more access. And lastly, a really huge pillar is that of amplifying our policy and advocacy, and Anna can chime in as her role has shifted towards knowledge management, knowledge translation to support particularly this work. But again, this is nothing new. If you remember our Together project and the interconnected nature of the 11 thematic cases, as well as sort of broader issues around the G7, government consultations and so forth, where we really are increasingly hoping to merge our agendas so that we have a more solid, interconnected sector, because we do feel that most of our values and norms are actually rather aligned, that we all agree on a lot of common principles. And so to not be too presumptuous, we were hoping to ask you to participate in a rather quick poll. It is there in both English and French, and really asking for your opinions. Apologies for the binary yes or no. We don't mean to minimize the complexity of any of these questions, but are hoping that you are leaning towards one or the other answer, and really just trying to validate this assumption that we have that our colleagues across the sector would actually agree on most things that we tend to discuss. So maybe taking a minute to give everyone a chance to answer. I'm hoping everyone can see the poll. We have about 25 answers so far. So maybe we'll give it another few seconds. It appears that most colleagues, okay, some are still answering. So I can already sort of, without closing it, but I can already anticipate that the vast majority of our colleagues agree that civil society space is increasingly threatened and in need of action I would assume. Similarly, 90% so far agrees that our sector's future depends on our ability to work collectively and build on economies of scale. The same exact percentage believes that Canada's trade, diplomacy, and defense pillars should be more aligned. Perhaps I'll close it, given that we reached quite a bit of a number, and for all of you who work better with visuals, hopefully you can see the results now. We also seem to agree that our diplomacy, trade, international assistance really must be aligned for a coherent international response. There's a considerable agreement that the faith-based competency is key for localized and context-informed solutions. And lastly, most of us seem to agree that integrated programming is really where our sector is going. So this is very encouraging in the sense that some of our initial thinking around the shared values and shared positions that we can rely on have been validated by you. So thank you for participating in that. And hopefully we can get a bit more of your insight as we move to the second more important part of the session, where we will kindly ask you to either stay in this room or join one of the two breakout sessions where we will be presenting the three pillars that I've just outlined and really trying to validate whether they make sense to you, whether your own policy priorities are, in your opinion, well encompassed by this, so that we know if this is something we should continue to nurture and build, or if we have some rethinking to do. So in terms of the logistics, I think you should all see the rooms right now. If you do not move, you will remain in this bilingual room with me. Otherwise, if you would rather just not rely on simultaneous translation, speak directly in French, please join the second group or group number 2. And if you would rather move to a breakout session with primarily English speakers, please join Anna in breakout room number 1. So hopefully that works. If anyone is struggling to access any of the two breakout sessions, please unmute yourselves and then we can manually move you to wherever you need to go. And then
I'm not seeing the breakout sessions come up.
I'm not either.
Me neither. I think they're not there.
In my case, they're under the 3 dots more in Zoom. I don't know if that's helpful, just because we have interpretation and other things on. Nope. So I guess we have to turn on the breakout rooms.
The breakout rooms are on. If you're joining from a web browser, you may not be able to see it. You may have to use the Zoom desktop client instead, unfortunately.
I'm using the Zoom desktop client and I don't see it. Where would I see it?
3 dots, but it says more. Like right by the red button that says leave.
No, the 3 dots aren't there.
I don't have 3 dots anywhere. No.
I don't either.
Nor do I.
The 3 dots on my phone just have the options of chat, language, transcript, and settings. No breakout rooms.
No, should that no dots on me? Maybe because the share screen is on.
I'm not entirely sure. I am wondering if it's possible to make everyone co-hosts, given that we recognize colleagues on the call, and that way everybody will see what we see, but I have no idea whether this is possible. No? Okay. We have 56 colleagues on the call, making it a little bit more challenging to move everyone one by one, but we might be able to try if nothing else is working.
I can assign people to the rooms if you have an order you want them to go in.
Yeah, so we could go based on whom we know, and then based on their language preferences, we can anticipate, and then asking others to stay on this particular call. Would that, oh, right, MP has a genius idea. If everyone could just put English or French next to their name, that would make it very easy for those of us with ability to assign you to a room to quickly do that. Sorry about that.
While that's happening, I just had a question on this session. Are we going to be, I know we're going into rooms to talk about like what the policy priorities are, but are we going to be talking about like the how, like in terms of like the mechanisms of how Coopération Canada will solicit policy input, in terms of, you know, we used to have a policy advocate, policy group, which doesn't exist anymore. Now there's the working group. So I was just a little bit curious about how that would tie in, but not sure the plans for the session.
So in general, this is very much an approach to, first of all, update our core overarching policy pillars, given that a lot is still sort of referenced, if you remember the 10-point agenda, which is 15 years old, so quite reasonably requires an update. And so the idea was really to start there, elaborate something that we can all agree on. So, and then once we do have that question around what answered, to move to a more sort of stakeholder engagement part of that work, which would be, as you're saying, Taryn, directly sort of stemming from that overarching approach. Okay, so if I'm not wrong, I think most of the people who are in this room are fine staying here, also because you have simultaneous translation. So hopefully that is working for you all. And then please feel free to speak in the language of your choice. This should hopefully work for everyone. I am adding right now in the chat a link that I would ask all of you who are using your computers or have the ability to access Concept Board, which does not require you to be registered in any way. All you need to do is type in any name. It does not really even need to be your name. And it will let you into what is essentially a board that has 3 pillars and then Post-it notes on both sides. I'm hoping everyone can see that. Please let me know if you are not able to access it.
Gloria, can we just click on the guest access option, or
Yeah.
do we have to choose and
So-
sign in?
So you click on the guest access
Okay.
and it will just ask you for a name. You can type in literally anything and you'll be let through. So absolutely no need to sign in. We've tested quite a few platforms to make sure everyone is able to participate, and then whoever is on the phone or is finding this hard to use, please let me know, and then I can just write or move things for you. On your left bottom side, you can see kind of a little map. It allows you to zoom in or out. You can obviously move the post-its, and you can also choose to create new ones either by clicking on the right click and then copying one, or by clicking sort of on the on the sort of plus button. Now I'm blocked, sorry, so I'm hoping this is essentially working for you all. If you have any questions, maybe just let me know. I'm just wondering if most of you have had a chance to go over the document we shared. It was really just the idea of dividing our work and dividing some of the core policy priorities that we as Coopération Canada have in 3 pillars, and then trying to understand throughout this session how well they really encompass all of your priorities. So if these 3 pillars do not make sense, or if you feel like something is missing, or that we should be shifting the way we're framing any of this work, please let me know. I thought it might help us sort of get into the exercise if we were to take some of the priorities that you see on the left side and trying to sort of move them to one of the 3 pillars where they think you belong. There are not many of us in this room. I was going to say breakout session, but we are the only ones not in one. I think there's about a dozen of us, so please feel free to unmute yourselves and suggest where things should go or ask any questions. I'll start and say that I think direction and control pillar should most likely be moved to effective systems of cooperation. And I will just take the hand so that it can actually be moved. So if you go up, it allows you to move from the cursor to the sort of a hand, and then you will be able to move things around. You can also create a new one or comment, although I think it would be very hard to see. And then as you're moving things around, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and saying what you're moving where or how you think they should go, that would be helpful. So again, if you want to do it yourself, the little hand icon at the very top would be the way to go about it. Someone has also moved strengthening sectors advocacy in relation to GAC to the effective systems cooperation. Does anyone else want to comment on what should go where, or if there are any sticky notes with policy objectives that don't really ring a bell or you're not sure what they entail, just let me know. You can also feel free to write in the chat if you would rather not unmute yourself, but given that everyone is looking at probably their own screens, as it's easier to see in that way, it might be easier if everyone just unmutes themselves.
Gloria, I have no clue what we are doing. Sorry. But I see things moving. I try to move things, but I really don't understand what.
Okay, so are you on the, are you in the app, the concept?
I am in the app. I can see all the, arrows moving back and forth and there, but
yeah, so those are colleagues who are on the call. So essentially, if you look at the 3 pillars, one is strengthen frameworks for CSO space, the second
Yes.
one being more equitable sector, and the third one, effective systems of cooperation. Those are sort of the overarching themes we hope
Yes.
to use to organize our work. And then the sticky notes on both sides are specific policy files that we either have or that we know some of our members are working on, just to kind of get us started, to try to first categorize them, and then really to move towards your own policy priorities, write them on these sticky notes and try to understand where they would fit. Also to potentially identify any that would not fall within any of the 3 pillars, and as a result might require us to think a bit further in terms of where they would fit or how we can make sure they are well included within our priorities. So for example, informing Canada's FIAP, Feminist Foreign Policy, or the Feminist International Assistance Policy, I would argue that would be going towards, oh, I can't seem to move it anymore. Okay, no.
I think I'm more, I can see that, but I'm more in terms of the technicalities of this, because I try to, you know, click on the squares and the
So if you go up, right under the title that says Cooperation Forum 2021,
yes,
there's a little hand button.
Oh,
that
okay.
allows you to move from the cursor to the hand. And so if you do sort of switch between the two, it would then allow you, so for example, I'm putting SDG tracking and advocacy for strengthened frameworks for those space, although you could argue that, you know, it could go towards effective systems or anything like that.
Yeah, but that's the way to move it. And the way to create it is to click on this, all these squares on the left side.
You can choose what is easier for you. You can either click on the sticky note button right here, and then choose your color and it will create a sticky note, or you can take one of the ones that you can see on the right side of the screen and you can add your policy priority. So for example, if we are talking about vaccine equity, that would really sort of have to be between effective systems of cooperation or maybe more equitable sectors. They do not squarely need to fit into one or the other. Hopefully they are sort of speaking to these broader systems. So if we're advocating for debt relief, that would also fall in the pillar of sort of amplifying other messages. I see someone.
Thank you very much.
Someone added strengthening care economy.
Gloria, could you comment about a little bit more about the main difference between strengthened frameworks for CSO space and effective systems of cooperation? Because I see some potentially overlapping between the two, and sometimes I see things that could, some are like a little bit more clear, but some could fit into strengthening the framework as well as effective systems for cooperation. So how would you differentiate between the two pillars?
No, I think you're completely right. And in fact, as we have moved towards the brief that you have sent, we sort of explained that one in clearer terms, which is more around amplifying policy and advocacy of other groups, just to kind of really explain what the two would mean. And so this would be for CSO space as well as sort of for the broader sector, given that most of our own agendas do require around CSO spaces. We don't often have ability to influence, for example, multilateral UN system and so forth. So I would say strengthening framework for, let me just copy the pillars we have. I'm not sure whether this is more helpful. So if we say that one is effective, equitable mechanisms of international cooperation and CSO space, the more equitable sector really being sort of inwards oriented, our organizations, what we can do. And then the third one being really your own priorities. One of them is sort of around common voice on climate change and environmental crises. Does anyone want to comment on any of those? Or where would the nexus go?
Gloria, I just have a comment for the group, I suppose, on how we can have localization and decolonization as priorities. To me, they're opposing concepts. And I didn't see the document you sent in advance. I apologize. So it might have been explained a little bit better in there, the nuance of it, but
right. Could you,
localization. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just, if you can elaborate how you see them as opposing, that would be helpful.
Localization is sort of a northern, like global north driven concept, integrating local systems into the existing humanitarian framework. Whereas like decolonization, as I understand it, would be really breaking down those systems and driving them from the global south to like rebuild the system.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that came up in last week's HRN meeting as well, if people are also members of that network. Just that there's nuance between those two concepts, and I guess really defining what we mean by those in order to sort of have a policy agenda around them.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I had a different understanding of localization and thought the two concepts were complementary. I don't come from it in a humanitarian space, but more the Equality Fund's priority of supporting uplifting women's rights organizations in the global south as a form of localization. So I think this points to Coopération Canada having a role to play in bringing these discussions to light.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hillary. Does anyone else wants to chime in? I'm just looking at the list of colleagues on the call, and I know quite a few might have very interesting opinions on where we stand on either of these. Please just feel free. Oh, Guy or Guy? I'm so sorry if I missed.
Yes. Hi, Gloria. Hi, everybody. Unfortunately, I have to leave in about 5 minutes for another meeting, but I wanted to just put something on the table which may be seen as bigger picture, but the political environment we have in Canada is very toxic, especially in this minority government kind of situation, and the unpredictability when we have, for example, in the last electoral campaign, putting in jeopardy potentially the amount of money available for ODA and so on. When we look at issues like good governance in Canada, a care economy and climate justice and gender equality, we could make so much more progress on these issues if we had a more proportionally representative government. And therefore, I think that there's a role for us to play in pushing electoral reform in this country. And I think the whole sector could benefit from that. And we would probably secure more predictable funding for our sector as a result in the future. It would be a long road, but if we never start talking about it, we'll never get there. So I would really want to start conversations around electoral reform as a way to promote social justice in Canada and elsewhere.
Thank you. I think that is very interesting. And I know a number of colleagues who are even in this group have been doing a lot of great work in connecting domestic and international cooperation causes and strengthening each other campaigns. And I think that would be sort of a very similar approach to kind of making those causal linkages between what we need to work on the Canadian side, because it also directly implicates our mandates. I've added a post-it on that. And so it would, I'm guessing, be somewhere between the more equitable sector and amplifying other policy and advocacy approaches, given that there's a lot of domestic actors working on that as well. But did I get that wrong? I'm happy to move it elsewhere. I think part of this approach is really to try to encompass as many things as possible in that kind of green area, so that if not all of us agree with specific concepts, they can still sort of be categorized in specific way that does allow us to see where they might be connecting, so that we can either very clearly say, I do not support this stance, this is not what I plan on doing, versus I can see how this relates to my own agendas and this is the extent to which I want to be engaged, or ways in which I'm happy to amplify or support some of those issues, even though we might not be able to work on them ourselves. So that has been our sort of thinking based on a number of discussions we've had from many of you, but I am wondering if that does resonate, if anyone has a different idea, given that this is a sort of 86, 87 member organization. So please feel free to unmute yourself. This does not seem to be a very hectic group. I'm guessing the triple nexus would be in improving our systems, mechanisms. There's principled humanitarian action, posted note in terms of amplifying other people's priorities. Gender equality forum commitments are being added. There's a posted around more funding for shifting power to global South organizations, especially women and marginalized communities. Managing reputational risks is in the amplifying other policy priorities category. I'm not sure who, Hillary, could you explain how the generation equality forum commitments would be towards sort of shifting mechanisms as opposed to more kind of advocacy and policy? Because there might be something that I'm not aware of it that perhaps other people in the group are not.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought of it with the SDG tracking and advocacy. It's very much related to that, but sort of diving deeper on SDG 5. So I wanted to put it next to that box, but if it's in the wrong pillar, it could certainly go to pillar 3 as well. I guess it's an example of a global mechanism that the Equality Fund is hoping CSO partners in Canada will help drive forward.
Yeah, no, that is helpful. I think there's a lot to be said around making sure that our various mechanisms are kind of speaking to one another, reducing reporting and increasing transparency, as we all seem to be with our heads in different databases, producing different figures on very often similar government and non-government efforts. So yeah, I can see how that is there, but also I'm guessing sort of belonging to both pillars. Is there anything on this list that you feel should be its own pillar? We need to rethink, something that you think Coopération Canada is really missing from its own policy portfolio or overall approach? Or are you working on something that we might not be able to fully tell from your websites or our sort of more organic participation in various forums and events or meetings? Or if you have any questions around the policy aspects that are on the board that you're not really sure what they really entail. Perhaps we should have done this at the very beginning. We were hoping that someone from the group might be able to report back on our discussion although I realize it has been largely digital. And what stands where, I'm happy to support, but if anyone is willing to speak to the rest of the colleagues who will soon join us from the breakout sessions, that would be amazing. Any volunteers or any questions to the previous sort of sets of things we're really hoping to answer? Okay, let's try this. If you could write your one top policy priority for the next 6 months or so, could you say it out loud and I'll add it to the board, or write it to the board? Or comment if yours is already on the board, and if your primary one is there, maybe your secondary one is not. I can start and say that on our end, sort of moving along direction of control, now that it is passed the Senate, is on top of our agenda, as is localization, that we at least see very similarly to what Hillary described, but are actually working on setting up a system that would help us to articulate a common sector, a definition and agenda, because we do see the need to make sure we are speaking the same language, given that these buzzwords can end up assuming very different meanings across thematic sectors. Anyone else with?
To your question, I'd say not just more ODA, but better ODA that gets to the most marginalized, those with the least funding. And that's core, flexible, and multi-year. I can write a post-it though, if it helps.
I think there was one on quality and quantity. So I'm just adding sort of focused on the least funded organizations.
Yeah, that'd be great, thanks.
Disability. And I cannot think of a word for long-term nature in English, but I'll just write that.
I think I see there's a post on accountability on environmental policies and approaches, and also I put in a second one about accountability to climate the targets, as the Canadian government has signed on a Paris Agreement, but maybe linked to that with our sector is also to focus on environmental justice, like climate justice work, which are linked but taking a slightly different lens in terms of focusing on those who are most marginalized and impacted by climate change, which the accountability part of our policies, our government's policies and commitments are, would speak to that.
Bella, would that be mostly around sort of advocacy and amplifying existing campaigns, or would you see sort of more lobbying to shift existing frameworks or mechanisms?
I think it's I'm looking at it under that mechanism from international cooperation, in a sense that it's something that we would want our government versus our own individual organizations, own areas of work and focus, which of course we all have those, but because these are national commitments, you know, and there are a number of them that would impact both what Canada needs to do at home and abroad. And it is tied to the SDGs to a certain degree as well, but it's kind of highlighting the justice part of that piece.
Okay, so yeah, so parts of it would be in sort of pillar one, but for many in pillar 3. That makes sense. Can someone maybe speak to the sector being a lead in development, no politics or DDD? What, how should we interpret that? I'm not entirely sure. I apologize.
Yeah, that means the defense, diplomacy, development, the treaties. You had the question there that it will be an alignment, and I wrote that it could be a double sword because all depends who is determining the agenda. So I think in the last couple of years, it's been the sector has been forced to work towards more extractive industry. The private industry is getting in. There are more agendas from the federal government that are kind of pushed into the sector. So I think it maybe being independent of that, or maybe having the possibility to share, to lead, the agenda in international cooperation. That's a dream.
So if I can summarize it in post-it note style, sort of informing Canada's broader feminist policy, would that be fair, although probably laconic?
But I think it goes beyond the feminist agenda. I think it's in general,
I meant foreign policy.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. I'll just add clarification there for those of us who might need it. Okay. I think we have other colleagues joining us from the breakout sessions. So let's wait for a second then. I'm not sure if everybody has joined from the sessions. It looks that way to me. We have had very much a tech-heavy session with a few very important clarifications around what we mean by certain themes and certain policy agendas, which we should certainly be sure to clarify before going any further. But I don't know, Nick and Anna, if you want to jump in and give us an update.
Oui, mais ça me fera plaisir d'offrir une petite mise à jour de la conversation qu'on a eue en français. Tout le monde avait bien compris le cadre dans lequel on travaille, ce qui est une bonne chose. Je crois qu'on a néanmoins terminé sur certaines clarifications qui étaient utiles sur la distinction. Je crois qu'on voyait plus d'interchangeabilité entre les deux, comme la première catégorie, secteur inclusif et équitable, et l'amplification des priorités du secteur, jusqu'à ce qu'on réfléchisse aussi un peu sur le premier étant aussi nous-mêmes, comment nous devons changer, versus les enjeux qu'on porte pour influencer les structures autour de nous. Ce que je dirais, ce qui était intéressant, c'est qu'il y a puis c'est ce que moi j'ai retenu, mais à la toute fin, c'est que certains thèmes existent dans les deux. C'est-à-dire que si on prend, par exemple, justice climatique, eh bien, c'est nous-mêmes. Et en même temps, c'est des enjeux qu'on doit porter auprès des cadres réglementaires et de politique. On a eu beaucoup de bonnes discussions, rajouter des choses par rapport aux enjeux qu'on aimerait porter par rapport, par exemple, aux mécanismes plus efficaces et les engagements de l'Affaire mondiale Canada. Je crois que ce qui est dans notre groupe, personne n'a contesté le cadre dans son ensemble. On n'a pas découvert un 4e pilier ou rien comme ça. Mais des bonnes conversations aussi qui ont touché sur les connexions qu'on doit faire et qui seront utiles pour nous, que ce soit avec d'autres plateformes à l'international pour arrimer nos approches de plaidoyer ou que ce soit le suivi d'enjeux internationaux comme ce qui se passe à l'OCDE et comment ça connecte avec notre travail ici. Mais une bonne conversation, puis sans vouloir présumer tout résumé, on a beaucoup à ramener à Coopération Canada sur cet exercice.
I can jump in next. So we had some interesting insights there as well. So it was we have a very rich board now to analyze going forward. So we saw one of the topics that we discussed was, for example, localization that was included in all the 3 pillars. And we had some interesting discussions on the reasons why localization could fall under one or under all those pillars. We also talked about a bit about climate and the climate language and how this could entail, for example, enactable food systems and how there is a lot of work to be done by CSOs on this topic. We also mentioned some work that is being done on local. We have the VNRs, of course, the voluntary national reviews, but a lot of these reviews being done at the local level, and so how this would be an interesting mechanism for more equitable sector. Other discussions we had were around developing finance and how this would determine kinds of development and the use that the fundings, the use given to the fundings. So some very, very interesting discussions there. And we also had some additions. For example, in our, on the red post-its in terms of alternative frameworks for international cooperation, increased support for healthy and resilient food systems. So these ones were included not necessarily under one or other pillar, but as new ones. But it was great discussion. Over to you, Gloria.
Sorry about that. We have had very similar, I think, discussions on many levels, both in terms of, for example, needing to provide definition of localization, which might look very differently for our colleagues working on the humanitarian end versus those focusing on sort of collaboration with local actors and shifting mechanisms, which is why localization is sort of between these pillars of our shift as a sector, but then also the mechanisms in ensuring our ODA is actually going to women's led organizations, organizations led by other marginalized groups, that the quality and not just the quantity of our ODA is improving, although certainly I doubt anyone would argue around the need for higher ODA. There were quite a lot of interesting points within sort of various post-its, but also the broader discussion around the need for our sector to influence national politics in ways in which directly implicate our sector. So, for example, looking at the broader foreign policy, going beyond just international assistance. But then we also have, for example, a post-it suggesting the need to support national electoral reform and making sure that those who represent us actually share a lot of our values, and that it is a more representative group within the Canadian context in itself. Lots of ideas around amplifying our colleagues in the global south and what they're doing. And then as you can see, we don't have a third pillar, although we did go back to the document that has been shared with colleagues to just sort of clarify the 3 pillars, with one being rather around the amplification of everyone's work, and the other 2. So we've sort of done similar thing of what you're saying, Nick, in terms of linking the external mechanisms that need shifting and a broader sort of CSO space, and those mechanisms and existing frameworks that we continue to try to inform and mold in a more equitable way. I don't know if anyone from various groups, I guess, wants to jump in case we have missed anything. Or are there any other questions that you would like to pose to us or the rest of the group? Any reactions at all? I think all 3 of us are very hard to offend, so. Jean.
It's hard to put a whole big piece of work out here and not have any echo back. So sorry about that. I want to tell you that I think this is a very good document. It's nicely put together. It will, of course, be enriched as you go through the implementation of it, as you were doing today in this. But it's a nice piece of work. Thank you very much for doing that for us. It's so much easier to have something to react to and then think about. And I think over time, this is going to be a good guideline, good framework.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you for all of the exciting work around innovative finance. Those are my evening readings for quite some time.
Yeah, if I can make a comment as well. First of all, yes, thank you so much for putting the work together, and those documents are really helpful. Perhaps this question goes along more with implementation, but thinking about how Cooperation Canada, as we work towards these more thematic sector-wide advocacy goals, and then where are the spaces where we look at perhaps more country-specific advocacy, and does that fit anywhere within these more broader advocacy frameworks? Thinking of the work, for example, that the regional working groups would engage in, and what Cooperation Canada's vision is for those spaces.
As very much a policy nerd, I don't want to overstep on the stakeholder management side. So I'm wondering if Nick or Anna, if you have clear positions.
I guess I'll pass it over to Nick, if you don't mind.
Well, I'm not actually so you just caught me out because I was answering another message on the side, which I shouldn't do while I'm in another session. But so Anna, if you could just give me that in a nutshell, and then I'm happy to pick it up.
Sure. I was just saying, I appreciate the wide sector-wide thematic approaches, but is there a space, or how do we think about the country-specific advocacy or goals? And is there a space for that as well within Cooperation Canada, especially thinking of the work that has been done by the regional working groups? Yeah, how does that fit into this broader vision?
No, well, it's a good question. And I actually hope it came up in maybe in some of the thematic issues that you would have been sort of in that left right-hand column on the screen. You know, I think it really does come down for us to where members want us to put our energies. And I think even just by this exercise, you'll see how many issues there are that we can potentially be working on. And so the prioritization is one that will, I think, often a lot depend on where our members put their energies and then drag us along with them. You know, this exercise is one that is overarching. And so, you know, I don't want to, you didn't want to overstep your bounds, Gloria. I don't think you would have, but I mean, with respect to the process ahead, I mean, we're going to package this into what we heard. We're going to validate it again with you. You know, we'll continue to build it out. And then we have to live it and practice it, and we'll find out what works and what doesn't. I think that we are richer for our working groups, and I think that might be another conversation to have, but how we're looking to have our working groups be as thriving a space as possible, and for us to therefore be able to carry perspectives that our members want to bring to us there. I'd also say that, this frame can help us get behind a lot of things. When we think about social justice questions, even if you look at in Canada, like what is our role to align with domestic LGBTQ plus issues? What is our what is our line to say, yes, we'll get behind and we'll do these things, whether it's that issue or others. That was one that came up. But so hopefully that's helpful as an answer, and you can keep challenging us on it and we'll keep growing.
If I can add, I think the universal nature of the challenges is really kind of front and center around the SDGs. And so that is one piece of the puzzle that I think a lot of the colleagues on the call, just thinking about the work that is being done around care economy, around challenges that very much represent social issues that our domestic progressive partners are working hard towards, then it becomes a sort of an issue-driven approach that then is very easy to very clearly sort of direct towards a particular geographic area or a country whose civil society might welcome our campaigns or amplification of their advocacy.
Something that, Gloria, that came up in our group, and I was just wondering if we can highlight, is the discussion around using terms localization and decolonization, and how that might mean opposite or same depending on who's looking at it. And I think as a sector, that might be good for us to unpack that further. So when because we know language matters and how we describe things matters. And so thinking localization is still very much a colonialism framework, by just using it in a different way. It might be, as a sector, it may be good to unpack that and just to come to a more not centrally agreed, but more alignment around what we mean by when we say those terms.
Thank you, Bella. You could not be more timely, because that is exactly the point that we were actually hoping to highlight. We have held discussion sessions with many of you over the last sort of 8-9 months around localization, collected quite a lot of feedback, and then had a lot of different discussions bilaterally or in smaller groups. And that has actually led to a couple of our colleagues, more specifically, I think both of them are on the call, Marlene Mundaka from Save the Children Canada, and Brian Tomlinson, who have graciously agreed to help set up and co-lead the working group on localization, so that we actually carve out space within Coopération Canada. And I'm trying to link to the portal right now, so that you can actually access the group, requests to be added as a member, and therefore facilitate our communication with the rest of you. We understand it is a term that means very different things to very different people, and so that is definitely on our agenda. It has been with even our global colleagues, Global Affairs Canada colleagues, and a number of you, the need for that kind of joint definition or a set of definitions and an agenda that we might be able to stand behind. And so if you are in any way interested, we promise not to overwhelm you with emails. And so if you could register on our portal, check out maybe other working groups that might speak to your work priorities, and then sign up to be added to the localization working group. This is something that we're definitely hoping to see take off in the next little while. And if you have already been working on these issues, I will link to an event, if you are able to join, for a global intel sharing sort of call on that is essentially aiming to help us map out who is doing what across the globe. And as we're forming our own Coopération Canada group, make sure that we're not duplicating anybody's work and that we are building on what is already out there or what we know is soon to come. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions at all.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to stress the importance of decolonization and reconciliation work within our sector, and the ways in which that can lead to the meaningful engagement of First Nations, Inuit and Métis people in decision-making and leadership positions in our organizations, that in itself will then cut across many of these challenges that we have, and will bring different knowledge systems and different research methodologies, different community perspectives into discussions about things like localization and climate adaptation, and inclusion and diversity. And that I just think that that's really important. It's really important within our sector that decolonization and reconciliation aren't seen as something that happens within a pillar, but is more seen as something that underpins all of our work that we do across all of those pillars, and that any decisions that we make in any of the areas that we're working in should be positively informed by the lived experiences and knowledge that Canada's Indigenous people should be able to bring to this table. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That is absolutely invaluable, and I think a lot of us on the call have been nodding in agreement. I know decolonization has been a very interesting discussion within other groups, for example, the Food Security Policy Group, and a lot of our colleagues on the call right now have been having these discussions, precisely as you're saying, kind of highlighting the need for those discussions to be mainstreamed into everything else that we do. Anna and I were on the call with someone from Global Affairs Canada a couple of weeks ago who was essentially complaining about the fact that civil society groups, regardless of where they turn, seem to be talking about localization and or decolonization, therefore raising the pressure within their own structures to have those discussions, which we took as a fantastic sign that we are speaking to one another. But I think we also have a lot to learn and would be very interested in figuring out how we can better connect our agendas and share resources and knowledge, as everyone is at a different stage of this journey. We definitely might have some work to do around redesigning a table that allows for a clearer identification of those cross-cutting issues. Our design skills will improve on that side by the time you see the next iteration. I'm not sure if anyone else has any questions. I would pass it over to you, Nick, to maybe leave us with some closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Gloria. And I think most importantly, thank you to you all for the time that you spend with us. I think hopefully you got from this that these are issues and matters that are very important to us. We're just trying to figure out how to put them together and make sure that we can prioritize them in ways that make sense to you, our members. This is only the beginning of a conversation to come. And so, look forward to hearing from us again on this. And of course, if anything comes to mind for you, you want to contact us separately, please feel free to do so. So just want to thank you again. And if you're joining us for the next session, as we look at the communications implications of our code of ethics. Certainly look forward to seeing you there. It'll be the last session of the forum. So thanks so much.